Welcome to Sleepy Tech Stories, where the fascinating world of technology meets the gentle art of storytelling. I'm here to guide you through the hidden chapters of our digital past, one soothing tale at a time. Tonight, we're traveling back to a time when connecting to the internet required patience, when every byte was precious, and when a simple phone call could disconnect you from the World Wide Web. This is the story of the dial-up modem, a humble device that bridged to worlds and changed everything. So settle in, close your eyes, and let me tell you about the little box that sang the song of the early internet. This is the rise and fall of the dial-up modem. In the quiet corners of your home tonight, your devices whisper stories of innovation and wonder. But there was a time, not so very long ago, when connecting to the digital world required patience, anticipation, and a very particular kind of music. Close your eyes for a moment and let yourself drift back to a simpler time. Picture a small beige box sitting beside a computer, its tiny lights blinking like gentle stars. Listen carefully, and you might still hear it. That unforgettable symphony of squeaks, chirps, and electronic handshakes that once announced our entry into cyberspace. This is the story of the dial-up modem, a humble device that taught an entire generation the art of waiting, the joy of connection, and the bittersweet beauty of a world that moved at the speed of patience rather than instant gratification. Tonight, we'll take a gentle journey through time, exploring how this remarkable little machine opened the doors to our digital future, one careful connection at a time. We'll discover the ingenious minds who created it, the communities it fostered, and the quiet revolution it sparked in living rooms and bedrooms around the world. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the story unfold. Like the dial-up connections of old, we'll take our time, savoring each moment of discovery along the way. Before we hear the familiar song of the dial-up modem, let's travel back to a time when computers lived in isolation, like islands in a vast digital ocean. It's the early 1960s, and the idea of machines talking to each other across telephone lines seems almost magical. Picture, if you will, a researcher named Robert Whitebread working quietly in his laboratory at Stanford Research Institute. Robert was deaf, and perhaps because of this, he understood better than most the importance of finding new ways to communicate across distances. In 1963, he created something remarkable, the first practical acoustic coupler. Imagine this curious device, two rubber cups designed to cradle a telephone handset like gentle hands holding a sleeping bird. When placed over the earpiece and mouthpiece of a phone, these cups could translate the whispers of electronic signals into sounds that could travel through the telephone network and then back into digital language on the other end. It was a bridge between two worlds, the analog world of human voices and telephone wires, and the digital realm of computers and data. Robert's invention didn't make much noise in the world at first, but it was the first note in what would become a global symphony of connection. Around the same time, in the halls of AT&T's Bell Laboratories, engineers were working on their own solution. In 1962, they introduced the Bell 123 dataphone, a sleek, professional device that could send information at the remarkable speed of 300 bits per second. To put this in perspective, that's about 37 characters per second, or roughly the speed at which a person might type a casual sentence. The Bell 103 used a clever technique called frequency shift keying. Think of it as a musical conversation between two modems. One modem would sing at frequencies of 1270 and 1070 Hz to represent ones and zeros, while the other would respond at 2225 and 2025 Hz, like two people humming different melodies in harmony. They could carry on a digital conversation without interfering with each other. This became the foundation, the musical scale, if you will, upon which all future modems would build their songs. For over a decade, 300 baud remained the standard speed, and in the patient world of early computing, it felt perfectly adequate. But change was coming. In 1968, a legal decision called the Cartophone ruling changed everything. Until then, AT&T had maintained strict control over what could be connected to their telephone network. The Cartophone decision opened the floodgates, allowing third-party manufacturers to create their own modems and connect them directly to phone lines. Suddenly, the world of telecommunications became a garden where many flowers could bloom. Small companies began crafting their own modems, each adding their own innovations to the basic Bell 103 design. The age of the acoustic coupler was ending, and the era of direct connect modems was about to begin. As the 1970s dawned, a new generation of engineers and entrepreneurs began to dream of a world where computers could talk to each other as easily as people picking up the phone. They couldn't have imagined that their work would one day fill millions of homes with the distinctive song of digital connection. But the first notes were already being written. As we drift deeper into the 1970s, let's visit a small company in Atlanta, Georgia, where two engineers named Dennis Hayes and Dale Hetherington were about to change the world in ways they never imagined. Picture their workshop in 1978, cluttered with circuit boards, tangled wires, and the quiet hum of electronic experimentation. Dennis and Dale had a simple but revolutionary idea. What if a modem could be more than just a translator between computers and phone lines? What if it could actually dial the phone itself? Until this moment, connecting to another computer was a delicate dance. You would manually dial a phone number, wait for the distinctive whistle of the remote modem, then carefully place your handset into the acoustic coupler or connect your direct line modem. It required timing, patience, and often several attempts. But Dennis and Dale envisioned something more elegant. They created the Hayes SMARTMODEM, a device that could understand simple text commands. Type ATDT followed by a phone number, and the modem would dial for you. Type ATH, and it would hang up. These AT commands, named for the attention prefix that told the modem to listen, became the universal language of modem communication. The first Hayes SMARTMODEM was a modest beige box that sold for $279, quite expensive for the time. But it represented something profound. For the first time, the barrier between human and machine communication was lowering. You could tell your modem what to do in simple English-like commands, and it would obediently carry out your wishes. The impact was immediate and transformative. Bulletin board systems, those early online communities where people shared messages, files, and ideas, suddenly became much more accessible. Instead of manually dialing each beeps, users could write simple programs that would automatically call multiple systems, check for new messages, and download files while they slept. This was the beginning of automated online life. The Hayes SMARTMODEM didn't just connect computers, it connected people to the idea that machines could be helpful partners in exploring the digital frontier. As the 1980s arrived, modem speeds began their steady climb. The Bell 212, a standard, brought us to 1,200 baud, 4 times faster than the original 300 baud modems. Suddenly, text appeared on screens more quickly, and file transfers that once took hours could be completed in minutes. By 1984, we reached 2,400 baud, and the world of online communication began to feel more responsive, more alive. Bulletin board systems flourished, and a generation of computer enthusiasts discovered the joy of digital community. Late at night, when phone rates were cheaper, they would dial into distant systems, exploring virtual worlds that existed only in the shared imagination of their users. The modem was no longer just a tool. It was becoming a gateway to a new kind of human experience, and the best was yet to come. Let's pause here in our journey and step into the warm glow of the 1980s and early 1990s, when dial-up modems created something beautiful and unexpected, the first true online communities. Picture a teenager in 1987, sitting in a dimly lit bedroom, the soft glow of a computer monitor casting gentle shadows on the walls. It's past midnight, the magical hour when phone rates dropped and the digital world came alive. The familiar sequence begins, the soft click of the modem picking up the line, the gentle tones of dialing, and then ... connection. Welcome to the world of bulletin board systems, or BBSS, as they were lovingly known. These were not the vast corporate-controlled networks we know today, but intimate digital gathering places, usually run by a single person from their home computer. Each BBS was like a cozy cabin in the electronic wilderness, with its own personality, its own community, and its own unique culture. The system operator, or SysOp, was part host, part curator, part digital innkeeper. They would carefully craft their BBS's personality, perhaps focusing on computer programming, science fiction, local community news, or specialized hobbies. Some featured elaborate ASCII art welcome screens. Others preferred simple, functional interfaces. Each was a reflection of its creator's passion and vision. Logging into a BBS was an intimate experience. You weren't one of millions of users. You were often one of just dozens or hundreds. The SysOp might personally welcome new users, and regular visitors became familiar faces in a small digital town. People used handles, creative usernames that became their digital identities. And over time, these online personas developed rich histories and relationships. The pace of BBS life matched the pace of dial-up perfectly. Messages were composed thoughtfully because uploading them took time. File downloads were planned carefully because a single large file might take hours to transfer. This enforced patience created a culture of quality over quantity, where every post, every shared file, every digital interaction carried weight. Multi-line BBSS were the luxury resorts of this world. Instead of supporting just one caller at a time, they might handle 4, 8, or even 16 simultaneous users. These systems often featured real-time chat rooms, multiplayer games, and elaborate virtual worlds. The most famous of these was probably Landemu, a text-based virtual reality where users could create rooms, objects, and interactive experiences using simple programming commands. Door games were another magical aspect of BBS culture. These were programs that ran outside the main BBS software, creating elaborate multiplayer experiences. Trade Wars 2000 to let players build interstellar trading empires. The pit allowed gladiatorial combat. Legend of the Red Dragon created a fantasy world where players could adventure, fight monsters, and interact with each other across multiple sessions. The beauty of these games was their asynchronous nature. You might log in, make your moves, and log off, knowing that other players around the world would continue the story while you slept. It was collaborative storytelling on a global scale, mediated by the patient rhythm of dial-up connections. Fitanet represented the pinnacle of BBS networking. This volunteer-run network connected thousands of bulletin boards around the world, allowing messages and files to propagate from system to system, like digital seeds carried on electronic winds. Every night, BBSS would automatically call each other, exchanging packets of messages and updates. By morning, a message posted in New York might have reached systems in London, Tokyo, and Sydney. This was the Internet before the Internet, a grassroots network built by enthusiasts, for enthusiasts, connected by the humble dial-up modem. It was slower than what we know today, but in many ways, it was more human. Every connection was intentional, every interaction was valued, and every community was built on the shared understanding that we were all pioneers in a new digital frontier. As we moved into the early 1990s, commercial online services began to emerge. CompuServe, Prodigy, and a small company called America Online started offering more polished, user-friendly alternatives to the grassroots BBS world. But for those who experienced the golden age of bulletin boards, nothing would ever quite match the intimacy and creativity of those early digital communities. Let's pause here in our journey and step into the warm glow of the 1980s and early 1990s, when dial-up modems created something beautiful and unexpected, the first true online communities. Picture a teenager in 1987, sitting in a dimly lit bedroom, the soft glow of a computer monitor casting gentle shadows on the walls. It's past midnight, the magical hour when phone rates dropped and the digital world came alive. The familiar sequence begins, the soft click of the modem picking up the line, the gentle tones of dialing, and then ... connection. Welcome to the world of bulletin board systems, or BBSS, as they were lovingly known. These were not the vast corporate-controlled networks we know today, but intimate digital gathering places, usually run by a single person from their home computer. Each BBS was like a cozy cabin in the electronic wilderness, with its own personality, its own community, and its own unique culture. The system operator, or SysOp, was part host, part curator, part digital innkeeper. They would carefully craft their BBS's personality, perhaps focusing on computer programming, science fiction, local community news, or specialized hobbies. Some featured elaborate ASCII art welcome screens. Others preferred simple, functional interfaces. Each was a reflection of its creator's passion and vision. Logging into a BBS was an intimate experience. You weren't one of millions of users. You were often one of just dozens or hundreds. The SysOp might personally welcome new users, and regular visitors became familiar faces in a small digital town. People used handles, creative usernames that became their digital identities. And over time, these online personas developed rich histories and relationships. The pace of BBS life matched the pace of dial-up perfectly. Messages were composed thoughtfully because uploading them took time. File downloads were planned carefully because a single large file might take hours to transfer. This enforced patience created a culture of quality over quantity, where every post, every shared file, every digital interaction carried weight. Multi-line BBSS were the luxury resorts of this world. Instead of supporting just one caller at a time, they might handle 4, 8, or even 16 simultaneous users. These systems often featured real-time chat rooms, multiplayer games, and elaborate virtual worlds. The most famous of these was probably Lambdamu, a text-based virtual reality where users could create rooms, objects, and interactive experiences using simple programming commands. Door games were another magical aspect of BBS culture. These were programs that ran outside the main BBS software, creating elaborate multiplayer experiences. Trade Wars 2000 to let players build interstellar trading empires. The Pit allowed gladiatorial combat. Legend of the Red Dragon created a fantasy world where players could adventure, fight monsters, and interact with each other across multiple sessions. The beauty of these games was their asynchronous nature. You might log in, make your moves, and log off, knowing that other players around the world would continue the story while you slept. It was collaborative storytelling on a global scale, mediated by the patient rhythm of dial-up connections. Fitanet represented the pinnacle of BBS networking. This volunteer-run network connected thousands of bulletin boards around the world, allowing messages and files to propagate from system to system like digital seeds carried on electronic winds. Every night, BBSS would automatically call each other, exchanging packets of messages and updates. By morning, a message posted in New York might have reached systems in London, Tokyo, and Sydney. This was the Internet before the Internet, a grassroots network built by enthusiasts, for enthusiasts, connected by the humble dial-up modem. It was slower than what we know today, but in many ways, it was more human. Every connection was intentional, every interaction was valued, and every community was built on the shared understanding that we were all pioneers in a new digital frontier. As we moved into the early 1990s, commercial online services began to emerge. CompuServe, Prodigy, and a small company called America Online started offering more polished, user-friendly alternatives to the grassroots BBS world. But for those who experienced the golden age of bulletin boards, nothing would ever quite match the intimacy and creativity of those early digital communities. As we reach the mid-1990s in our gentle journey, we encounter a company that would transform dial-up from a hobbyist pursuit into a mainstream cultural phenomenon. America Online, AOL, didn't just provide internet access. It created an entirely new way of thinking about online life. Picture the scene. It's 1995, and millions of American households are receiving mysterious packages in their mailboxes. Inside each package is a colorful CD-ROM with bold promises. 1,000 free hours. Explore the internet. Connect with friends. These weren't just software disks. They were invitations to join a digital revolution. AOL's marketing campaign was unprecedented in its scope and persistence. The company mailed out hundreds of millions of these promotional CDs, ensuring that virtually every household in America received multiple copies. The discs became so ubiquitous that people used them as coasters, bird scarers in gardens, and art projects. But for millions of families, they represented something much more significant, their first glimpse of the online world. What made AOL special wasn't just its accessibility, but its approach to the internet experience. While technical users were navigating the raw, text-based internet through command lines and complex protocols, AOL created a warm, welcoming graphical interface that felt more like exploring a friendly neighborhood than venturing into cyberspace. The AOL experience began with that iconic dial-up sequence. Users would double-click the AOL icon, enter their username and password, and then wait for the familiar sounds of connection. But AOL's modem sounds were somehow different, more polished, more reassuring than the harsh electronic handshakes of other ISPs. It was as if AOL had managed to make even the technical process of connection feel more human. Once connected, users entered AOL's carefully curated digital world. Instead of the vast, unorganized expanse of the early internet, AOL presented organized channels: news, sports, entertainment, kids only, computing. Each channel was staffed by AOL employees and volunteers who created content, moderated discussions, and helped newcomers feel welcome. The crown jewel of the AOL experience was its email system, announced by that now legendary phrase, "You've got mail," spoken in the warm, friendly voice of Elwood Edwards. These 3 words became the sound of digital connection for an entire generation. The phrase was so culturally significant that it became the title of a major Hollywood movie, cementing AOL's place in popular culture. But AOL's real innovation was in creating online communities that felt safe and accessible to mainstream users. AOL chat rooms were organized by interest and geography, allowing people to find others who shared their hobbies, concerns, or location. Unlike the sometimes intimidating culture of bulletin boards and Usenet newsgroups, AOL chat rooms were designed to be welcoming to newcomers. The company employed thousands of volunteer community leaders who helped moderate discussions, welcome new users, and maintain the friendly atmosphere that became AOL's trademark. These volunteers weren't paid, but they received free AOL accounts and special privileges in exchange for their service. It was an early example of how online communities could be built through a combination of technology and human curation. AOL Instant Messenger, launched in 1997, revolutionized real-time communication. AIM, as it became known, allowed users to maintain buddy lists of friends and family, see when they were online, and engage in private, real-time conversations. The service introduced concepts that seem obvious today, but were revolutionary at the time: away messages, user profiles, and emoticons. The culture that developed around AIM was uniquely creative. Users crafted elaborate away messages that served as personal status updates, mini-blogs, and artistic expressions. Screen names became carefully chosen digital identities. The sound of an AIM message arriving, a simple ding, became one of the most recognizable audio cues of the late 1990s and early 2000s. AOL also pioneered the concept of online content partnerships. The service featured exclusive content from major media companies, early webcomics, and interactive experiences that couldn't be found elsewhere on the internet. For many users, AOL wasn't just a way to access the internet. It was the internet, a complete digital ecosystem that met all their online needs. The company's success was staggering. By 2000, AOL had over 30 million subscribers, making it the largest internet service provider in the world. Its market capitalization reached heights that allowed it to acquire Time Warner in what was then the largest merger in corporate history. But AOL's success contained the seeds of its own decline. As users became more sophisticated and broadband connections became available. AOL's walled garden approach began to feel limiting rather than protective. The open internet offered faster speeds, more content, and greater freedom than AOL's curated experience. The transition away from AOL was gradual but inevitable. Users who had learned about online life through AOL's training wheels eventually wanted to explore the broader internet without restrictions. The company's dial-up infrastructure, once its greatest asset, became a liability in the age of always-on broadband connections. Yet AOL's impact on internet culture cannot be overstated. It introduced millions of people to email, instant messaging, online communities, and digital content. It proved that the internet could be accessible to mainstream users, not just technical enthusiasts. In many ways, AOL was the bridge between the hobbyist internet of the 1980s and early 1890s and the mass-market internet we know today. As we remember the AOL era, we're really remembering a time when going online was still special, still intentional. Every connection was a conscious choice. Every email was an event. Every chat conversation was a small adventure. It was the internet at human scale, mediated by the patient rhythm of dial-up connections and the warm promise of digital community. Let's pause in our journey for a moment and listen, really listen, because no story of the dial-up modem would be complete without celebrating the most distinctive aspect of the dial-up experience, its voice. Close your eyes and let your memory drift back to that unmistakable sequence of sounds. It began with silence, the quiet moment before connection, pregnant with possibility. Then came the gentle click of the modem picking up the phone line, followed by the steady pulse of touch-tone dialing. Each number had its own musical note, creating a brief melody that was different for every call. But then came the real symphony, the handshake between modems. What sounded like electronic chaos to the untrained ear was actually an intricate negotiation, a conversation between two machines, trying to find the best way to communicate across the imperfect medium of copper telephone wires. The sequence always began the same way. The calling modem would announce itself with a series of tones, like a digital hello echoing across the connection. The answering modem would respond with its own greeting, a slightly different pattern of sounds that said, "I hear you, let's talk." What followed was a rapid-fire exchange of information. The modems would test the quality of the phone line, measuring noise levels, echo characteristics, and frequency response. They would negotiate the highest speed both could support, falling back to slower rates if the line quality demanded it. They would agree on error correction protocols, data compression methods, and dozens of other technical parameters. To human ears, this sounded like a cacophony of squeaks, chirps, static bursts, and electronic warbles. But to the modems, it was a sophisticated conversation, as meaningful and structured as any human dialogue. Each sound had purpose, each tone carried information, each pause was significant. The entire handshake process typically took 30 to 45 seconds, an eternity in our current age of instant connections, but a reasonable price to pay for the miracle of digital communication in the dial-up era. During those seconds, users would wait with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Would the connection succeed? Would it be fast or slow? Would it be stable enough for the task at hand? Different modem manufacturers had slightly different handshake sounds, creating a kind of electronic accent that experienced users could recognize. Hayes modems had a particular timbre, US robotics modems sounded slightly different, and the various 56K implementations each had their own sonic signature. The quality of the connection could often be predicted from the sounds during handshake. A clean, crisp negotiation usually meant a good connection with high speeds and low error rates. Lots of static, repeated attempts, or unusual pauses often indicated line problems that would result in slower speeds or frequent disconnections. Some users became so attuned to these sounds that they could diagnose connection problems just by listening. They knew that certain patterns meant the phone line was noisy, that particular sequences indicated the remote modem was having trouble, and that specific combinations of tones suggested the connection would be unstable. But beyond their technical significance, modem sounds served an important psychological function. They provided feedback in an era when computer operations were often mysterious and invisible. The sounds told users that something was happening, that their computer was actively working to establish a connection. In a world before progress, bars and status indicators were common. Audio feedback was crucial for user confidence. The sounds also created a sense of ritual around going online. The dial-up sequence became a kind of digital ceremony, marking the transition from offline to online life. Families would recognize the sounds and know that someone was getting on the internet. The distinctive audio signature of dial-up became part of the domestic soundscape of the 1990s and early 2000s. Children who grew up during the dial-up era often have strong emotional associations with these sounds. They represent excitement, possibility, and the magic of connecting to a wider world. For many, the sound of a modem handshake is as nostalgic and evocative as any song from their youth. When broadband connections became common, one of the most jarring changes was the silence. DSL and cable modems connected without fanfare, without ceremony, without the reassuring audio confirmation that a connection was being established. The internet became faster and more reliable, but also somehow less human, less personal. Today, when we occasionally hear modem sounds in movies or television shows, they serve as instant time markers, immediately placing a scene in the 1990s or early 2000s as effectively as any visual cue. They've become the audio equivalent of vintage clothing or period. Automobiles, instantly recognizable symbols of a particular era in technological history. The sounds of dial-up modems were more than just technical necessity. They were the voice of an entire generation's first encounter with the connected world. They were the soundtrack to humanity's initial steps into cyberspace, and they remain one of the most distinctive and memorable aspects of the dial-up experience. As we continue our gentle exploration of the dial-up era, we must pause to appreciate something that seems almost alien in our current age of instant gratification. The culture of patience that dial-up modems created and required. Imagine, if you will, a world where downloading a single song took 20 minutes, where viewing a photograph meant waiting several minutes for it to appear line by line on your screen, where checking email was a deliberate act that required planning and intention. This was the reality of dial-up internet, and it shaped not just how we used technology, but how we thought about time, anticipation, and the value of digital experiences. The culture of dial-up patience began with the connection process itself. Unlike today's instant internet, going online in the dial-up era required a conscious decision and a commitment of time. You couldn't casually check something online. You had to decide that the information was worth the time and effort required to connect, search, and download. This created a different relationship with online content. Every web page visit was intentional. Every download was carefully considered. Users would often prepare lists of sites to visit or files to download before connecting, maximizing the value of their online time. It was common to see people with notebooks beside their computers, planning their internet sessions like explorers preparing for expeditions. The visual experience of dial-up web browsing was uniquely suspenseful. Images would load progressively, appearing first as blurry, pixelated previews that gradually sharpened into full resolution. This created moments of anticipation and discovery that are impossible to recreate with modern high-speed connections. Sometimes the slow reveal would build excitement. Other times it would lead to disappointment when the final image wasn't worth the wait. Web designers of the dial-up era had to be masters of efficiency and user psychology. They learned to create compelling content with minimal bandwidth requirements. Text was king, images were used sparingly, and every graphic element had to justify its file size. This constraint led to some remarkably creative and efficient web design, where every pixel served a purpose. The concept of web-safe colors emerged from dial-up limitations. Designers worked with a palette of just 216 colors that would display consistently across different computers and connection speeds. This limitation, rather than stifling creativity, led to a distinctive aesthetic that defined the early web. Sites were clean, functional, and focused on content rather than visual effects. Download culture was perhaps the most distinctive aspect of dial-up patience. Downloading a single MP3 file could take 15 to 20 minutes on a good connection and hours on a poor one. Software downloads were major undertakings that required planning and commitment. Users would often start downloads before going to bed, hoping to find completed files waiting for them in the morning. This led to the development of download managers, specialized software that could resume interrupted downloads, schedule downloads for off-peak hours, and manage multiple simultaneous transfers. These tools became essential utilities for serious internet users, as important as web browsers or email clients. The concept of download queues became part of daily internet life. Users would carefully prioritize their downloads, balancing file size against importance. A new software update might take precedence over a music file, but a highly anticipated game demo might be worth an overnight download session. Shareware culture flourished in this environment. Software developers learned to create compelling programs that could be distributed in small file sizes. The concept of try before you buy worked perfectly with dial-up limitations. Users could download a small demo or limited version of a program, test it thoroughly, and then decide whether the full version was worth a longer download. Online gaming in the dial-up era required a different kind of patience and strategy. Real-time games were limited by latency and bandwidth constraints, leading to the popularity of turn-based games and asynchronous multiplayer experiences. Players would make their moves, disconnect, and return later to see how the game had progressed. Email culture was also shaped by dial-up constraints. Messages were typically text-only, with attachments used sparingly. The phrase, "Please don't send large attachments," became common in email signatures. People learned to be concise and efficient in their digital communications, skills that served them well even as technology improved. The dial-up era created a generation of users who understood the true cost of bandwidth. They learned to value digital content based not just on its quality, but on the time and effort required to obtain it. A song that took 20 minutes to download was treasured in a way that's difficult to understand in an age of streaming music services. This culture of patience also fostered a different kind of online community, because going online required intention and commitment. The people you encountered in chat rooms, forums, and bulletin boards were genuinely engaged. Casual browsing was rare. Most online interactions were purposeful and meaningful. The transition to broadband didn't just change connection speeds. It fundamentally altered our relationship with digital content and online experiences. The patience and intentionality that characterized dial-up culture gave way to the instant gratification and casual browsing that define modern internet use. Yet there was something valuable in that culture of patience. It taught users to be thoughtful about their online activities, to value digital content, and to appreciate the miracle of global communication. In our current age of infinite content and instant access, there's perhaps something to be learned from the more deliberate, patient approach that dial-up modems required and fostered. As we approach the end of our journey through the dial-up era, we must explore the great transition that changed everything: the arrival of broadband internet and the gradual decline of dial-up modems. The seeds of this transition were planted in the late 1990s, even as dial-up technology was reaching its peak with 56,000 modems. Telephone companies and cable providers were quietly developing new technologies that would make dial-up seem as antiquated as telegraph lines. Digital Subscriber Line, or DSL, was the first major challenger to dial-up dominance. DSL used the same copper telephone wires that carried dial-up signals, but it operated at much higher frequencies, allowing voice and data to coexist on the same line. This meant users could be online and use their phone simultaneously, a luxury that dial-up users could only dream of. Early DSL connections offered speeds of 256 kilobits per second, or 512 kilobits per second, roughly 10 times faster than the best dial-up connections. But more importantly, DSL was always on. There was no dialing, no handshake sequence, no connection ritual. The internet was simply there, waiting, like electricity or running water. Cable modems represented an even more dramatic leap forward. Using the coaxial cables that brought television signals into homes, cable modems could deliver speeds of several megabits per second, 50 to 100 times faster than dial-up. The first time a dial-up user experienced a cable modem connection, the difference was almost shocking. Web pages that once took minutes to load appeared instantly. Downloads that once required overnight planning could be completed in seconds. But the transition wasn't immediate or uniform. Broadband deployment was expensive and technically challenging. Rural areas, in particular, remained dependent on dial-up connections for years after urban areas had transitioned to high-speed internet. This created a digital divide between those with access to fast internet and those still limited by dial-up speeds. The cultural impact of this transition was profound. The always-on nature of broadband connections changed how people thought about the internet. Instead of being a destination that required a conscious decision to visit, the internet became an ambient presence, always available for quick checks, casual browsing, and spontaneous communication. Email checking, which had been a deliberate activity in the dial-up era, became casual and frequent. Instant messaging evolved from a special occasion activity to a constant background presence. Web browsing shifted from purposeful research to casual exploration and entertainment. The economic model of Internet service also changed dramatically. Dial-up services, typically charged by the hour or offered limited monthly hours, encouraging users to be efficient with their online time. Broadband services offered unlimited usage for a flat monthly fee, removing the economic incentive for restraint and efficiency. This shift had unexpected consequences for Internet culture. The thoughtful, intentional approach that characterized dial-up communities gave way to more casual, ephemeral online interactions. The barrier to entry for creating and consuming online content dropped dramatically, leading to an explosion of websites, blogs, and multimedia content. For AOL, the transition to broadband was particularly challenging. The company's carefully curated walled garden approach had been perfect for dial-up users who needed guidance and structure in their online experience. But broadband users wanted freedom and speed, not curation and limitation. AOL's subscriber base began a steady decline that would continue for years. The sounds of the Internet changed too. The distinctive audio signature of dial-up connections, those squeaks, chirps, and electronic handshakes disappeared. Broadband connections were silent, efficient, and invisible. The ritual of going online was replaced by the assumption of always being online. Yet, the transition wasn't entirely smooth. Early broadband connections were often unreliable, with frequent outages and technical problems. Many users kept their dial-up accounts as backup connections, leading to a period where both technologies coexisted in many homes. The phrase, falling back to dial-up, became common when broadband connections failed. The last holdouts of dial-up culture were often the most passionate. Rural users who couldn't access broadband, budget-conscious consumers who found dial-up adequate for their needs, and technology enthusiasts who appreciated the simplicity and reliability of dial-up connections. Some bulletin board systems continued operating well into the 2000s, serving small but dedicated communities of users who preferred the intimate text-based culture of the dial-up era. By 2010, dial-up internet had become a niche service, used primarily in areas where broadband wasn't available, or by users with very basic internet needs. The Great Transition was largely complete, and the age of always-on high-speed internet had begun. But something was lost in this transition. The patience, intentionality, and appreciation for digital content that characterized the dial-up era gave way to the instant gratification and information overload of the broadband age. The intimate communities and thoughtful interactions of the dial-up era were replaced by the vast impersonal networks of the modern internet. As our gentle journey through the dial-up era draws to a close, let's reflect on the profound lessons and lasting impact of these humble devices that once connected our world. The dial-up modem was more than just a piece of technology. It was a teacher. It taught an entire generation valuable lessons about patience, anticipation, and the true value of connection. In our current age of instant everything, these lessons seem almost quaint, but they contain wisdom that remains relevant today. First, the modem taught us the value of intimacy. In the dial-up era, going online was a conscious choice that required planning and commitment. You couldn't casually check something on the internet. You had to decide that the information was worth the time and effort required to obtain it. This created a more thoughtful, deliberate relationship with digital content that many argue we've lost in the age of infinite scrolling and constant connectivity. The modem also taught us patience, not just the ability to wait, but the skill of finding value in the waiting itself. The slow loading of web pages created moments of anticipation and discovery. The progressive appearance of images built suspense and engagement. The time required for downloads made us appreciate the content we received. In a world where everything arrives instantly, we've perhaps lost some appreciation for the things we consume. Perhaps most importantly, the dial-up modem taught us about the preciousness of connection itself. Every successful dial-up session was a small miracle, two machines finding each other across vast networks of copper wire, negotiating a common language and maintaining a fragile link despite noise, interference, and technical limitations. The distinctive sounds of modem handshakes reminded us that connection was an achievement, not an assumption. The communities that formed around dial-up technology were uniquely intimate and purposeful. Bulletin board systems, early chat rooms, and dial-up gaming communities were built by people who genuinely wanted to be there, who had made the conscious effort to connect. This created a different quality of interaction, more thoughtful, more committed, more human in many ways than the casual, ephemeral connections that characterize much of today's internet. The technical constraints of dial-up also fostered remarkable creativity. Web designers learned to create compelling experiences with minimal resources. Software developers crafted efficient programs that could be distributed in small file sizes. Content creators learned to engage audiences with text, simple graphics, and clever design rather than bandwidth-intensive multimedia. These skills and approaches remain valuable today, even in an age of abundant bandwidth. The dial-up era also demonstrated the power of grassroots innovation. The bulletin board system network, FIDANet, and early online communities were built by enthusiasts and volunteers, not corporations. They showed that meaningful digital communities could emerge organically without central planning or commercial motivation. This spirit of grassroots innovation continues to influence internet culture today. From a technical perspective, the dial-up modem represented the absolute pinnacle of analog communication technology. The progression from 300 baud to 56,000 modems showcased decades of incremental innovation, clever engineering, and the relentless pursuit of efficiency. The V90 standard, in particular, was a masterpiece of signal processing that squeezed every possible bit of performance from copper telephone wires. The modem also played a crucial role in democratizing access to information and communication. Before dial-up modems, computer networking was primarily the domain of universities, corporations, and government agencies. Modems brought networking capability to individual users, small businesses, and home enthusiasts. They were the bridge between the exclusive world of early computer networks and the inclusive internet we know today. The cultural impact of dial-up modems extends far beyond technology. They changed how we think about distance, community, and communication. They made it possible for people with shared interests to find each other, regardless of geographic location. They created new forms of art, literature, and entertainment. They established patterns of online behavior and social interaction that continue to influence digital culture. The sounds of dial-up modems have become cultural artifacts, instantly recognizable symbols of a particular era in technological history. They evoke nostalgia, not just for the technology itself, but for a time when the internet felt more human-scaled, more personal, more special. These sounds remind us of a time when going online was an event, not a constant state of being. As we've transitioned to broadband and beyond, we've gained tremendous capabilities, faster speeds, richer content, more sophisticated applications, and constant connectivity. But we've also lost some things that the dial-up era provided: patience, intentionality, appreciation for connection, and intimate online communities. The legacy of the dial-up modem isn't just technological, it's cultural and philosophical. It reminds us that constraints can foster creativity, that patience can enhance appreciation, and that the most meaningful connections often require effort and intention. In our current age of instant gratification and constant connectivity, these lessons from the dial-up era remain surprisingly relevant and valuable. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through the rise and fall of the dial-up modem, let's take a moment to appreciate the quiet revolution these humble devices created. In the span of just a few decades, dial-up modems transformed from exotic laboratory equipment to household necessities to nostalgic relics. They were the bridge between the isolated computers of the early digital age and the connected world we inhabit today. Without them, the internet as we know it simply wouldn't exist. The story of the dial-up modem is really the story of human ingenuity applied to the fundamental desire to communicate and connect. From Robert Whitebrick's acoustic coupler to the sophisticated V90 standard, each innovation represented someone's vision of a more connected world. These weren't just technical achievements. They were acts of imagination, leaps of faith that better communication would lead to better understanding. The communities that formed around dial-up technology, the bulletin board systems, the early chat rooms, the collaborative networks like Fitinet were previews of the social internet that would follow. They showed that people would use technology not just for information or entertainment, but for genuine human connection. They proved that digital communities could be as meaningful and supportive as physical ones. The patience and intentionality that dial-up required created a different kind of internet user, more thoughtful, more appreciative, more committed to the communities they joined. While we've gained tremendous capabilities with broadband and mobile internet, there's something to be said for the more deliberate approach that dial-up fostered. Today, as we carry the internet in our pockets and expect instant access to all human knowledge, it's worth remembering the lessons of the dial-up era, the value of patience, the importance of intentionality, the preciousness of connection, the power of constraints to foster creativity, the beauty of communities built by genuine enthusiasm rather than algorithmic engagement. The sounds of dial-up modems have become the audio equivalent of vintage photographs, instant triggers for nostalgia and memory. But they represent more than just technological history. They're reminders of a time when the internet felt more human, more personal, more special. They're echoes of humanity's first tentative steps into cyberspace. In our current age of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and ubiquitous computing, the dial-up modem might seem quaint and primitive, but it was these simple devices that first taught machines to talk to each other across vast distances. They were the foundation upon which our entire connected world was built. The engineers who designed them, the entrepreneurs who marketed them, the enthusiasts who used them, and the communities that formed around them were all pioneers in the truest sense. They were exploring uncharted territory, creating new forms of human interaction, and laying the groundwork for the digital civilization we now inhabit. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you can still hear them, those gentle electronic voices calling across the darkness, connecting distant minds, building bridges of understanding one careful handshake at a time. The dial-up modems are mostly silent now, but their legacy lives on in every connection we make, every community we join, and every moment of wonder we experience in our connected world. The rise and fall of the dial-up modem reminds us that technology is not just about speed or efficiency. It's about human connection, creativity, and the endless desire to reach across the void and touch another mind. In that sense, the humble dial-up modem was one of humanity's greatest inventions, not because of what it was, but because of what it made possible. Sweet dreams, and may your connections always be strong, whether they're measured in bits per second or beats per heart.